Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Shattock, and here with me today is Sarah Norcross, the director of PET, the Progress Educational Trust, an independent charity that improves choices for people affected by infertility and genetic conditions. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Alex. I'm looking forward to your questions from the SRF.
I have to say, it's very strange to be the one interviewing you today, Sarah, but hopefully I can rise to the challenge. So, today we're going to be talking about getting into the field of science communication. You are undoubtedly a leading science communicator, running the PET podcast, BioNews, and lobbying for change in government. But you haven't always worked in the field of science communication. You used to be a barrister. How did you make this move from barrister to science communicator?
So I practiced as a barrister in Manchester for several years before realizing it wasn't quite the career for me. If you're looking for something to describe it as being like, I'd say it's almost like having an exam every day and having to revise the night before, because that was inevitably, as a junior barrister, when you'd get your papers. So I decided to take a career break and to think about what I wanted to do next. And I have to say, I didn't ever think that I would go into science communication at that point, but it's because I got involved with a charity that I started down that path and things sort of snowballed, I guess, from there.
And do you think your law background helped to make you a better science communicator?
My career at the bar definitely helped me become a better science communicator. There is nothing like having to get up in front of a judge and explain something that the day before you might have known nothing about. I can still recollect having to swat up the night before about different types of welding um, and having to explain the difference between tack welding, spot welding, and various other types, and then have to cross-examine an expert witness. So it very much taught me how to master getting to grips with something at short notice, but also making sure that I'd got to grips with it enough that although I wasn't answering questions about it, I could ask other people questions about it. It also, I think, gave me a lot of confidence. And I probably didn't think so at the time in presenting, because when you've been asked difficult questions by a High Court judge, um, you then, being asked questions by somebody interviewing for local radio isn't quite as daunting, I have to say.
And what did your career path within science communication look like before you became the director of PET?
I got into science communication really through volunteering for the Daisy Network, which is a charity that helps women who've had an early menopause or primary ovarian insufficiency, as it's called now. And my main responsibility for that charity was publishing their quarterly newsletter. And as anyone who's ever been involved with a newsletter will tell you, it's a thankless task because you're forever chasing people for copy, or having to write it yourself. You're constantly looking for new things to say about the old things. I can remember being so desperate that, I published a recipe for menopause cake, not to make you have a menopause, but to alleviate the symptoms. I made it and my husband refused to eat it. But I think it taught me a great deal about the discipline of writing and having to fit things in, because it was in a sort of physical newsletter. You had to fit things in columns and all that, and it was really quite a challenge. And I moved on from just doing the newsletter to attending medical conferences, and I find those incredibly interesting, and which is quite difficult to. They're quite difficult to attend when you're not one of the club, so you're not a medic. But I found it very much like being at the bar. The same sort of behaviors and conversations could get you a very long way in that. But I think the most valuable thing to me when I was at Data Network was BioNews. And that was how I came across the work of PET. But I used BioNews to help me fill that newsletter because it has had all the latest developments in egg donation, in policy changes, in potentially in people looking at the genetics of primary ovarian insufficiency, all those sorts of things. So it was an absolutely key reading for me during that period. And because of that, I became aware of a PET event discussing whether donor anonymity should be removed and we should move to the identity release system. And I remember attending an event at Pets, and to my, I think, horror, saw that my lecturer in family law was one of the presenters. And then when she gave her presentation, I found I fundamentally disagreed with her, the angle that she was coming from. And so we had, I thought, well, I had to sit here and say nothing, like I'm in a tutorial back at university and anything for an easy life, or I challenge her. And I chose to challenge. And I think that was a light bulb moment for me. It made me more engaged in the work that PET does. And so when the opportunity came for me to join PET as its director, it was something that I was super keen to do.
So, having come into science communication from a non-science background, do you think it's important to have specific subject knowledge, or is that something that you can work around or maybe pick up as you go along?
That's a really good question, Alex. And I guess it depends very much what you want to do in science communication and what your aims are. Now, if you think about a science journalist, um, they, Hannah Devlin on The Guardian, for example, she has to cover a really wide range of topics. She is not an expert in them all, but what she will do is she will do some desktop research, she'll speak to experts, and then she will translate that into something that the Guardian readers can understand. And that's really, I think, is the crux of it. So obviously, I came to this to PET. I had some quite good knowledge about assisted reproduction, but in relation to genetics and also stem cell research, I had very little knowledge. And so I had to learn quickly. And I was very keen to attend meetings, to learn, and to really throw myself in at the deep end to learn. But also, I spent time with one of our founding trustees, Professor Marcus Pembury, who's a geneticist. And I spent a couple of days with him where basically he taught me everything I know and have some of which I've now forgotten about genetics. So I think it really very much depends on what you want to do. So if your thing is embryo research and that's what you've done your master's, your PhD in, you've got a huge amount of subject knowledge, so that's fine. But if you suddenly started wanting to talk about climate change, you've got to do a lot more homework before you engage on that. So I suppose it depends, if that answers your question.
Yes, that does answer my question. Thank you very much. Leading on from that, have you had any topics that you've particularly struggled to communicate, and how did you get around that?
Some subjects are much more difficult to communicate than others. At the beginning of the work on the mitochondrial donation campaign, that was a great challenge, but it's a question of practice, listening to others, refining, and trying again. And I think that's really, for me, the model that I tend to follow. I have to say, if I do a media broadcast, I never come away going, yay, that was fantastic, perfect. I've never, ever thought that. I've always thought, I could have done that question a bit better. And I'll think exactly the same about this interview in about half an hour. So it's that I think I'm quite self-critical. And the challenge on the horizon is going to be stem cell based embryo models, which are fiendishly complicated, have a complicated, in my opinion, quite long winded name. And I don't know how the public are going to understand that as a name. And I wish that someone had come up with something that is much easier for the public to understand and sort of get behind the spirit of what it is.
Thank you, Sarah. I think everything falls down to practice, doesn't it? So now changing topics slightly, I imagine our audience is interested in how they themselves can get into science communication. Are there any opportunities at PET where aspiring writers can develop their own communication skills?
At PET, there are several ways that people can get involved in science writing. So the first one is by applying to be a volunteer writer for BioNews. And to do that, you need to submit an application through the website. And Joe, our genetics editor, will get in touch telling you then what you need to do to progress that. people can also, well, at the moment, only people at UCL can apply to go onto our science writing scheme, which is a training course in which people get detailed feedback on their articles every week. Now, we have over the years have some people say, gosh, it's not fair, I'm not at UCL. And when they've gone to their university, they have actually managed to get funding to go on the course themselves. So if you're interested in doing that, then please do contact me and I'll see if I can help to get you a funded place on the course. And then the other way that people can help us with science communication are through social media. So social media, as everybody knows, is a very hungry beast and just wants more of you all the time, more posts. And so we're always looking for people who may be able to help us with that. And when we've been talking really about science writing and about media work, but also images, say a picture can paint 1,000 words, whatever it is. But really, people who can do images to go with our social media posts to convey the message we're trying to get across in one of our online events can all be really helpful too. So there are lots of different ways that you can help.
I, for one, can definitely support everybody getting involved in writing the social media posts, as that's something that I volunteer for at PET. So far we've discussed volunteering opportunities with PET, but more broadly, do you have any advice for someone looking to become a full-time writer?
So to become a full-time science writer, again, it depends on what type of science writing that you're aiming to do. But there are master's courses you can do in science communication. There are certainly used to be ones in science journalism. So those are things that you could look at if you're looking at wanting to do an extra qualification. But as I've sort of said really already, it comes down to practice. So if you're in a particular area, it may be that you want to look for a charity that you have an interest in or is related to your research in somehow, and think about whether they want someone to help write for their newsletter, for blog posts for their website, things where hopefully you could get a byline so that you can then start collecting a sort of portfolio of your work. And I think that's one of the things that's attractive to people for volunteering to write for BioNews, because there you get your name on the articles, you get a page on the website, and so with one link you can put on your CV a great body of the work that you've produced. And I think it has certainly helped people in their careers, because they've said, oh, at interview they asked me about one of my articles I'd written for BioNews, and it did really help me because it showed that I could précis a science news story really well and accurately. So I think those are some of the tips that I would give to people.
So before we reach the end of this interview, Sarah, do you have any more words of wisdom for our audience?
Gosh, what words of wisdom have I got? That's quite a struggle to think of words of wisdom. But I would say, and I think I'm a bit like a broken record, practice, 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 but also research and read, I think. So read different science communicators, see what you like, cherry pick things that you think are great. Also, I think you could say, because you can learn techniques from them about how they do things. But I also think that it's important that you develop a little bit of a thick skin and don't take criticism of what you say too personally. Obviously, to listen to it, but to think, well, if your work is being edited, it's going to change. That's what editors do, and that's what I remind people who do our writing scheme, that the editors are paid to edit. They're not paid to just read it and publish it. And each editor will have, as well as the house style of the publication, will have their own subjective views on how they think. So I've worked with loads of editors on BioNews over the years. They all have their little pet hates and pet likes. And I'm not talking about Progress Education or just likes and hates. And so they will edit the work accordingly. And I think that in a way, that's one of the strong advantages of writing for BioNews, is you get that different sort of feedback. But you have to realize that none of this is personal. It's all about improving the reader's experience. When you finished your copy, if it's just for your own blog post or it's for something that you're sending in to somewhere else for publication, my final top tip would be to read it out loud. Yes, you feel like a nana doing it, but there is no better way than picking up any mistakes than reading it out loud, because it picks up the things that, your spell checks, etc., don't. You realize that if you're going blue in the face, your sentence is too long. And also that, if you're reading it through and you lose enthusiasm, if you're boring yourself, that's not a good sign. So you need to revisit it. So definitely my final top tip is to read it out loud, however foolish you feel.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all this really useful advice and a real valuable insight into your career. So just before we go, Sarah, would you like to remind the audience where to find out more information about volunteering for PET?
People can find out more about the opportunities for pets by visiting the website www.progress.org.uk and hunt around on the website, and you'll find all the relevant information about the opportunities for working with us there, and also how to subscribe to Buy News, because as I said, it's really important to read. And hopefully by reading Buy News, it will help your science writing improve just by doing that one thing. And thank you, Alex, so much for taking time out to interview me today.